From San Francisco, the city by the Golden Gate, television networks and stations of the United States are bringing you the Japanese Peace Conference from the War Memorial Opera House, the same building where just 6 years ago the United Nations was born. This morning, for it is only 10 o'clock here in San Francisco, the delegates will sign the treaty. Throughout this last week, they have gathered in plenary sessions to consider rules of procedure and to hear each country's representative make a statement regarding that treaty. This business, preliminary to signing, is now completed. Those who are planning to sign will do so today, and 48 of the free nations of the world do plan to sign. They've already announced that intention. The 3 communist nations perhaps will not. The delegates of the 51 nations are now taking their seats, and in a few moments, this morning's session will begin. This is Walter Cronkite speaking to you from the Opera House in San Francisco. This historic session, it looks as if, will begin very closely on time. 10 o'clock was the scheduled time. It's running a little past that now, but not in keeping with past performances here at San Francisco. All the delegates seem already to be in the hall, all except perhaps the Czechoslovakian, Polish, and communist delegations, who we have not spotted as yet. Earlier this morning, about an hour ago, Mr. Andrei Gromyko, the chief of the Soviet delegation, held a news conference here in the Veterans Building right next door to the Opera House. Again, he repeated the communist charges that this is not a treaty of peace to be signed here this morning, but a treaty for war, that it sets the stage, he says, for a renewed Japanese aggression, this time under the aegis of the United States, and that the United States is gaining by this treaty merely the power to build a military base in Japan. These are charges he has made here on the floor of the peace conference in San Francisco, and where there was nothing new in his charges that he gave to the news conference today. It seems to set the stage now for the communists to claim that this aggressive arrangement between the United States and Japan threatens China, Red China itself, and that situation cannot pertain. And now Bryson Rash is down in the lobby. We will take our cameras to him.
We're now down here in the Opera House, and you know, we've been so intense on the developments of the conference itself and on the activities of the Russians and the activities of the Americans and the United Kingdom delegation. But there's another aspect of this conference that has, I think, been greatly overlooked, and I'd like to call it to your attention now. I'd like to introduce to you the principal ladies of the conference. Won't you come in, please? Mrs. John Foster Dulles, Mrs. Dean Acheson, and Mrs. Percy Spender of Australia. The 3 leading ladies of the whole conference, I should say. Your husbands have done a beautiful job here, and I wondered if you're proud of them. Mrs. Acheson?
Indeed I am. I'm very happy. It's the way it's gone so far.
Mrs. Spender?
Yes, I've enjoyed the conference enormously, or probably that's the wrong word. I found it extraordinarily interesting. I'm very proud of what our men have done.
Mrs. Dulles, have you enjoyed your stay?
I've enjoyed it very much, thank you.
Good.
It's been very pleasant, and the weather's been beautiful, and everything has been splendid.
You must be very proud, too, of the number of ovations and the number of accolades that your husband has received.
Yes, I think he's been very much touched.
Yes,
Mr. Dulles made wonderful speeches yesterday.
I thought he did.
We all
too.
enjoyed his last night's speeches enormously. Magnificent.
Has this been a difficult conference insofar as the activities around outside the conference?
Oh, no. Very pleasant indeed.
Oh,
very
wonderful.
pleasant.
Well, thank you so much, Mrs. Dulles.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dulles, Mrs. Acheson, and Mrs. Spender. Thank you. I wonder if I can have Senator Stiles Bridges, who is standing also here in the lobby of the Opera House here. Come in, Senator. How are you, sir?
Hi, good morning.
Senator, have you been following Mr. Gromyko's news conference in the
I've been
Veterans Building right across the street?
very carefully, and it's the usual Gromyko conference with loud protestations and reverberations, which I suppose he hopes will re-echo to the communist world.
Senator, one of the problems on this treaty is going to be the ratification, and I've heard it suggested that the Senate stay in session another week or 10 days in order to ratify now.
I don't agree to that. I think that it'd be impossible to ratify it now, but I think that you'd have much greater goodwill, and there'd be more likelihood of it going through without too much opposition if at least this country had a time to digest it first before they pressured it through. And so I would hope it would come out the first of the year, but for the general good.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Bridges. Now back upstairs to our television booth in the Golden Circle of the Opera House.
And here in the hall, the delegates are milling about down on the ground floor, as you can see, awaiting Mr. Acheson's gavel calling this last session of the Japanese Peace Conference to order. And there are the Russian seats, you see, and they are empty. It is believed here that the Russians will not show up at all for this morning's signing ceremony. They certainly have given no indication that they intend to sign, and in fact, that being a great understatement, they have given every indication that they like nothing about this treaty. They call it a treaty of war, not of peace. Neither have the Polish or Czechoslovakian delegations shown up this morning. Their seats are empty too, and none of their delegates stand in this milling throng ready to take their seats. This treaty to be signed with Japan this morning will bring to an official close 10 years of war with the Japanese Empire. An empire that now finds itself beaten and vanquished, and as its premier, Shigeru Yoshida, told this conference last night, a nation which no longer has any feeling toward aggression. That was the pledge and promise made by Premier Yoshida as he addressed this silent group of delegates at last night's session. Again and again, he said that his country is a new country, a new Japan, with none of the ties with the old militaristic Japan. This is a claim that Mr. Gromyko at his news conference this morning denied. He said that this treaty does nothing to eliminate the militarists in Japan, but only perpetuates them now under the flag of the United States. The treaty is called by the Allied countries, by the 48 which will sign the treaty this morning, a treaty of reconciliation. It is a treaty of compromise, true, a treaty that does not give every nation exactly what it wants, but the nations that are going to sign this treaty this morning have subjugated their nationalistic interests, and particularly those countries of Asia which feel they have a very just claim against the Japanese nation for reparations for the severe damages they suffered in World War II. Well, all of these nations have said that they will give up some of those things in order to establish international peace in the Far East, and they think that this is a step in that direction. All of the nations have risen to defend the arrangement which will permit American troops to be based in Japan, although several of the Southeastern Asian nations said in their speeches here that they were not entirely convinced that this was a good thing or that it was conducive to really established peace in the Pacific, but they did recognize that Japan had no police powers and could not prevent aggression against her unless troops were based in her country. It is recognized, however, as a temporary arrangement. Mr. Acheson has taken his seat as permanent chairman of this conference. The delegates are beginning to return to their seats. They have all been up to take a close look at the peace treaty table itself, where the document lies, a document that, as their names are called, probably in alphabetical order, each of the 48 free nations here will step forward. His chief delegate will append his signature, and his nation will be at peace with Japan. None of the communist delegations have shown up, and it seems almost certain now that they will not be present at all for this signing ceremony this morning. It means that their last appearance at the Japanese Peace Conference was last night, when Mr. Gromyko staged an 11th hour attempt to stall this conference. He was gavelled out of order by Mr. Acheson. He appealed to the conference itself to overrule Mr. Acheson. The conference sustained Mr. Acheson as usual by an overwhelming vote, almost unanimous. There was one abstention, and Mr. Gromyko was ruled out of order, had lost his last attempt. His last attempt was made by trying to bring up again Soviet amendments to the draft Japanese peace treaty, a draft drawn up by the United States and Great Britain after consultation with most of these nations here. One of the great significances of this conference is the fact that it has provided a new system of international diplomacy, a system of reaching conferences by agreement outside of the meetings themselves. Outside the conference hall, we see the War Memorial Hall here, we see the Russian limousines, the Cadillac limousines just pulling away from the outside.
Small courtyard, but no, they got into their big limousines, the Russian delegation, and they are off and on their way back to Hillsborough, the home that they have rented here for this conference. Andrei Gromyko in the first car and his aides and assistants in the other 3 big limousines following down and around and away from the Civic Opera House. It looks like the Russians have gone from the conference here and they will not come back. And now back upstairs to our room in the Opera House itself.
This is Walter Cronkite back in War Memorial Opera House in San Francisco with the session of the Japanese Peace Conference, bringing it to an end, the signing of the treaty about to begin. The scene you saw below was the Russian delegation departing from the Japanese Peace Conference. In effect, they did walk out, although we had nothing as dramatic as they're leaving their seats in the hall and stamping out of here because they just did not appear at this morning's session. They were here in the vicinity of the Opera House, however, because they came in to a news conference held in the Veterans Building, the news, press, radio headquarters next door to the Opera House. Mr. Acheson is gaveling this meeting to order, and our microphones are turned below into the Opera Hall.
Delegates, be seated, please. Delegates, please take their seats. The signing ceremony of the conference for the conclusion and signature of the Treaty of Peace with Japan is convened. Your Excellencies, since our session last evening, we have been joined by the Right Honorable Herbert Morrison, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs of His Majesty's Government in the United Kingdom. I shall ask Mr. Morrison to open our ceremony this morning. Mr. Morrison.
Mr. President and fellow delegates, we are about to sign a treaty of peace with Japan. It is my privilege, on behalf of the United Kingdom, as co-sponsor of the draft before you, to invite you to take part in this ceremony of signature. To my great regret, I was unable to be present for all your deliberations, but I was determined to attend this final solemn act of the conference, and I have hastened from London to do so. Sir, once again, this great and lovely city of Francisco, it is a lovely name too, as are so many American place names, sees the conclusion of an international instrument of world importance. The treaty is in essence a treaty of peace between Japan and each of the signatories, a solemn engagement which determines the basis of the relations between Japan and each one of us. My own country, Britain, has a long tradition of contacts with Japan. It was with more than formal regret that we saw these old traditions of friendship broken. It is with more than formal pleasure that we see them restored. Our act of signature does more than liberate Japan in international law. It does so on terms which restore her self-respect and which dignify both Japan and ourselves. A great company of the nations here assembled who have been at war with Japan have freely agreed, after long consultation, on a liberal and non-restrictive peace treaty. We have come to this conclusion because we believe that this is best, not only for Japan, but for the world. This is no act of charity or of condescension. It is the result of a deliberate moral decision taken because we believe it to be in the best long-term interests of humanity. We want peace, and in a spirit of humility and sincerity, we believe that those who desire peace should make peace, and should make it on terms which will provide enduring peace and not sow the seeds of future war by imposing spiteful acts on the vanquished. It was, I think, the late H.G. Wells who, once seeking to emphasize the reality of some incident, described it as being as real as spiteful acts. Sir, to Japan, I would say that this is an act of faith and an act of trust. Faith in Japan's qualities of character and industry, in her determination to achieve peaceful, progressive social responsibility, and trust in her intention to devote those qualities to the good of her people and to the well-being of all men and women. At this conference, tributes have been paid to the leading part played by the government of the United States in the prosecution of the war against Japan, in the conduct of the occupation, and in the preparation of the peace treaty. On behalf of my country, allied with the United States in war, in the occupation and in the preparation of the treaty, I associate myself with these tributes. Sir, I do not forget the bitter sacrifices of the past. These sacrifices can never be made good. And on this day, as we conclude peace with Japan, the hearts of multitudes all over the world are heavy with memories. I venture to assert that these multitudes are with us in spirit here today, and that it is the duty of all of us to see to it that we save their children from a repetition of these tragic experiences. The conference has considered the terms of the treaty. I know I speak for both sponsors when I readily acknowledge its imperfections. Imperfections which bear more heavily on some than on others. Your acceptance of these imperfections is an inspiring example to us all. For our common aim is peace, and peace calls for effort and for sacrifice. Sir, voices have been raised here against the signature of this treaty. Voices of those who themselves played no prominent part in the war against Japan, who suffered little or nothing at Japanese hands, and who, by their record elsewhere, have by their own acts cast doubt on their motives here. Their arguments have been blemished by inherent contradictions. I wish they had been able to take this occasion for big and warm-hearted declarations of policy which would have caused the common man to feel that a really new chapter was opening up in world affairs. Unhappily, that has not been so. Nevertheless, I shall still hope. They have said only one thing which will find echo, I believe, in the breasts of all of us. They have deplored the absence of China. So do we all. The reasons are, however, now well understood, and meanwhile, China's legitimate interests are carefully safeguarded in the treaty. Thus, Japan will now have the task of adjusting her own future relations with her great neighbor. We accept the unfortunate fact that China cannot be with us. But without China, we cannot and must not presume to set the pattern for the future relationship of these two great nations of Asia. That momentous decision they must take for themselves, and I hope they will take it wisely. Our deliberations on the nature of the peace we seek to make with Japan are concluded. I invite the conference to ponder for a moment the bearing of what we do here when we make peace with Japan on what we achieve throughout the whole world. As with Japan, so with all countries. We want peace, true peace, lasting peace, founded on justice, fair dealing, friendship and equality. Japanese aggression was defeated, and reconciliation has now been achieved. What a bitter paradox it is that as we make peace we do so with anxiety and foreboding lest new aggression breaks out from another quarter. Today we are reaching the solution of one problem. In the Far East, as elsewhere, many difficult problems remain. But when you are faced with many problems, it is at times better to tackle them piecemeal and solve them one by one, rather than attempt something more spectacular and more ambitious. The Far East is rapidly increasing in world importance. Its problems, economic, social, and political, cry urgently for solution. We are here making a beginning by solving what can be solved first. We hope and believe that the solution of the next problems will be a little easier because of what we are doing today. We have been told at this conference that no one can ignore China in considering the affairs of Asia or the world. Sir, I agree. It is equally true that no one can ignore Japan. No greater disservice could be rendered to world peace than to suggest that the restoration of freedom and independence of Japan should be delayed until friendly and normal relations between China and the rest of the world are restored. That would be grossly unjust to Japan, a source of friction in the Far East, and in the opinion of the British government would be a dangerous mistake. This, Mr. President, is the end of a chapter. It is also the opening of a new chapter, not only in our relations with Japan, but in our efforts to promote stability in the Far East. I would close with a friendly word to the Japanese people. The foundations of democracy have now been laid in Japan. But we in Britain know from our century-long experience that the evolution of democracy is difficult and long. Mistakes can easily be made. Patience is required and continuous effort. We shall watch developments in Japan with sympathy and with understanding. We shall watch them also not wholly free from anxiety. We look to the Japanese people to be equal to the challenge. Sir, many of my countrymen were disturbed by the exceptional combination in pre-war Japan of a high degree of technical industrial efficiency with low labor standards, discouragement of trade unionism, and social reaction. Sir, that was not good. It would be a grave matter if it held sway in the future. Today, in signing up for the new and better relationship between Japan and the world, we earnestly hope for a new Japan of national dignity, international cooperation, and social justice. The Prime Minister of Japan will carry back to his country the good wishes of the nations assembled here, and their hope that the second half of the 20th century may bring to Japan as to the whole world relief from present anxieties and the attainment of lasting peace and prosperity for the nations and their peoples. Let peace progress and security march on.